How able are they to track his movements? After all, however else you think about him, this is a very canny man, and they've had a lot of experience with war and with high security. Everyone who's been to Baghdad has something to report on all of that. Do they think they know where he is?
They know where 4 of his bunkers are. They know that one of his bunkers is quite deep in the ground and very hardened. That is, there's something like 10 to 12 feet of concrete because Saddam has built these bunkers. So they know where he conducts his business, and they know many of the locations where he spends his evenings. However, intelligence is faulty. You know, a lot of this is overhead intelligence, and a lot of this is communications intercepts where they pick up telephone calls and radio intercepts. So it's spotty at best. So one of the things they have to do is target all of those locations. And Tom, as you know, in Panama, they tracked Manuel Noriega for days, and then they lost him in 4 hours. The same thing when we attacked, the United States attacked Gaddafi in Libya. They tracked him for days, and they were absolutely certain he was in his compound. And I think he was in his compound that night, but they missed him. So there's no such thing as surgical strikes. So this is not an exact science, and it will evolve slowly. And they, to be successful, they have to take out the leader of the country, because especially in this case, this man's word is law, and if they have to ask for surrender, they want to ask from this man. And or if he's not there, they hope the country just sort of crumbles, the military leadership crumbles around him.
Fred Francis, we're going to go now to Saudi Arabia, where NBC's Mike Betcher is on duty. It is now the middle of the night there. It is about, what, 3:15 in the morning, I guess now, Mike, at this time, right?
That's correct, Tom, and yet another plane has taken off. I can see the orange glow of the afterburner as it heads into the night sky to destinations unknown. You know, Tom Aspel, who we've lost contact with in Baghdad, does indeed have a front row seat. He's at the Al Rashid Hotel. Fred was talking about targeting. The Al Rashid Hotel sits between the presidential palace and a small airport that would be used by Saddam Hussein in the event he has to make a getaway or wants to make a getaway. While I was in Baghdad in December, there was a Soviet press report quoted in Baghdad papers which said that there were underground hangars to be used for airplanes to carry Saddam Hussein out of Baghdad in case they thought that all was lost. They quoted that report, the Baghdad papers, saying how it showed that the Soviet Union betrayed them. But all around that area are many government buildings, and
in fact,
there
there's one,
are
Mike,
very few civilians.
There's one right across the street, as a matter of fact, and there are lots of government complexes in that area as well. When Perez de Cuellar was there the other day, he was meeting in a government house, in effect, in a compound not too far from the hotel. I was struck by the fact that it was a very short distance away. I would think that those government compounds could be targets as well. There is the city of Baghdad as it is spread out. You heard Ed Peck earlier say that it looks like Los Angeles. That's a fair description. It is a relatively low-level city. It is not a city compacted like, say, Beirut, and so the bombing targets can be isolated to a certain degree, at any rate. Out by the airport, Mike Betcher, everyone who flies in there is struck by the fact that there are lots of military installations around there.
In Baghdad or here in Saudi Arabia?
Baghdad, Mike.
Yes, in Baghdad. You're struck by the anti-aircraft guns, on roofs all over the city. There were air defenses. You know, one of our drivers there was in the Iraqi reserves, and he said, you know, my job, if there is a war, is to fire one of the ACAC guns, one of the anti-aircraft guns. And he said, if I'm called up, I'm not looking forward to that task. He said, how would I hit a missile? How would I hit a fast airplane with these old guns? Now, he was on the old guns. There are modern missiles, surface-to-air missiles, all around Baghdad. Those are well hidden, but there are a lot of air defenses guarding that city. It would be very precarious for a manned aircraft to make an attack there. That is probably why the cruise missiles were fired first.
All right, NBC's Mike Betcher, who is in Saudi Arabia for us tonight. The post there is right next to the big air base at Dhahran. That has not been a secret to anyone, although it has been tightly held as a result of military restrictions. Several planes did take off from there tonight. They were F-15Es, we believe. Other F-15Es took off from other sites. To bring you up to date at this hour, 7:16 Eastern Standard Time, an attack has been underway for some time now against targets not only in Iraq but also in Kuwait. We believe that those would probably be the forward troop positions of the Iraqi forces who have been in Kuwait now since early August of this year. The operation is called Desert Storm, and President Bush is scheduled to go on television tonight at 9 Eastern Time to report to the nation on what is going on. One of NBC's resident experts is with me at this hour, and that's Gary Sick, who served in the Carter administration, the National Security Council staff, has spent his adult lifetime studying that part of the world, and he was a man who believed until the last moment that maybe war could be avoided. Now it cannot.
No, it cannot.
And what is the greatest concern that you have as a political student of that part of the world?
Well, the one thing that, if Saddam had started this, of course, the onus would have been on him for the attack. Now it will be seen as a clear case of the West launching an attack against Saddam Hussein.
But with fair warning to Saddam Hussein.
No. But I'm simply talking about the political realities. Right. And there are people who, in the Arab world, who will respond to that with anger. It brings out all of these anti-American feelings and so forth. And as the damage reports begin to come in from Iraq, I think that is going to be one of the things that will be seen. So politically, whether it's right or wrong, that is one of the things that we will see.
What would you be advising the President of the United States to be doing and saying to follow the military operation?
Well, it would be interesting to know if there was, in fact, any alert that caused this.
We're going to come back to you, Gary Sick. We've got a development going on in Saudi Arabia right now. If you'll just stand by, because we do want to get into that. NBC's Mike Betcher is in Saudi Arabia at this hour. And Mike, what can you tell us about what you're hearing and what is going on there?
Well, Tom, the air raid warning has gone off. Sirens are blowing. We're getting our gas masks out just in case. Need to screw the canister on here. We'll just have to wait and see what is to come. There are extremely good air defenses around this area. We hope they are extremely good. There haven't been any more takeoffs in the last 3 minutes, and so the entire city right now will be heading towards their underground shelters. Certainly many of our staff should be taking off to those shelters at this very moment. We'll stay here with you as long as we can.
Mike, let me just ask you about procedures. We don't want you to stay there a moment longer than you feel that you should for your personal safety. What were you told beforehand about what would happen if you heard air raid sirens in the Dhahran area?
If air raid sirens were sounded, it meant that the city would probably be under attack, that it could be gas, that we should proceed to bomb shelters where we would put on our masks. They would then seal the doors, and we should be in safety there. And that's the procedure. We'll just have to see what happens. We hear some noise right now. We hear a jet engine. The sirens are still going. Let's listen. As many of you folks as you can should head to the shelter now.
Mike, get Arthur Kent to run up to the Joint Information Bureau. Get Arthur Kent to find out. We just lost Saudi Arabia. That's not an encouraging sign. We've lost the transmission from Saudi Arabia. They are at Dhahran. It's an air base that's one of the major launching pads for the fighter jets that are in that area. The Saudis have secured the area. I want to reassure everyone that this could be just a regular interruption on the part of the Saudis. That is one of the most secure areas that exist in Saudi Arabia. It's on the Persian Gulf itself. It's a large complex. That's the place where those American troops were landing. We've had a tactical fighter wing that has been based there as well as ground troops in that area, so we have no reason to be unduly concerned. But prudence, of course, requires the people who are on the ground to take whatever precautionary moves that they must at this time, and we trust and pray that they are, and we will be attempting to reestablish contact with them as quickly as we possibly can. NBC's Gary Sick, he's not NBC's, but he is for the moment, is our expert in this area. We were talking just a few moments ago about what you would be telling the president about the political consequences, the potential fallout once the military operation is over, what he should be sensitive to, and the message that he ought to be sending to those parts of the Arab world who are not under attack tonight.
I think at the first place, he should, if there was, in fact, a reason, let's say the Iraqis were arming their missiles or something, that this was a reason for us to go in, then he should obviously stress that. I think he has to stress very much that this is not an attack against the people of Iraq or against the Arabs generally, that it is, in fact, an attack against specific military targets, and to the very best of our ability, that will be maintained.
How much help can he get from Hafez al-Assad in Syria at this hour, from President Mubarak in Egypt, from King Fahd in Saudi Arabia on that count?
Well, the third point that I was going to mention is that he should stress also the fact that we're not in this alone. And I think the presence of even the token part of the Arab forces in this attack would be very, very important from that point of view. How much he can actually count on, where Syria has no air forces in the battle, I mean in Saudi Arabia. So they're in no position to offer anything at this point. I think what we have to worry about with Assad is a couple of days from now, when he judges how the Arab reaction has gone, as to whether he'll stick with us or not. And I think it's a very open question.
And there's some question about whether he'll even use his troops in this attack. And that's a concern that Secretary of State Baker had when he was visiting Saudi Arabia just a week ago.
You know, the thinking was very much that the first phase would be purely air, and that it would probably go on. It's only been underway now for a couple of hours. It will go on at least until midnight Eastern time, when daylight begins to break over the area, and then we'll see whether it goes on. That's the first time we're going to get any real indication of how much has been done.
All right, can we put up now an electronic map to show you the area and what we think is going on at this hour, and it will just give you a kind of an evaluation. What you see in the lower right-hand part of your screen is Kuwait, and just below Kuwait is Dhahran, where we had that report interrupted just moments ago. We believe that the F-15s have left from there and from central Saudi Arabia, going to target somewhere in Iraq. The indications are that the first attacks on the city of Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, were by Tomahawk cruise missiles. We've lost contact now with Tom Aspel, who was our correspondent there, and we have not been able to get back to him since that time. He is at the Al Rashid Hotel. He was looking west to the airport that you can see on the map. He reported that there were numerous very large explosions, lots of anti-aircraft fire that had been set off earlier. NBC's Fred Francis was telling us as well that he believes that it may have been a deliberate attempt to get the Saudis to light up their systems so we can take a look at their radar. Their radar would guide their missiles as well, and we would want to knock them out so we would knock out effectively their air defense system. That's what we know at this hour. When we left NBC's Mike Betcher and his colleagues, our colleagues there moments ago, air raid sirens were sounding in Dhahran. We have not been able, however, to get any additional report from them on just what is going on. There has been concern that Saudi Arabia would come under attack, but with all of the air cover that could be provided by the Allied force, led principally by the United States, we have no reason to get ahead of the story to believe that they are in imminent danger at this hour. And the hotel in Dhahran, the International Hotel, has a very large and substantial bomb shelter. Arrangements were made for people to get down there. It's where the Joint Information Bureau is as well. In Washington right now, two students of the Middle East. One of them is Robin Wright, who has written extensively and authoritatively about that part of the world, and Ed Peck, who served in the United States Embassy in Baghdad and is a man who is very familiar with Saddam Hussein. Robin Wright, let's begin with you and pick up on this business about what's the most important thing that President Bush can do once the military strike is over.
Once it's over, well, I think that we're going to have to wait and see three things. First of all, whether Iraq carries through with its threat to strike Israel, and to see if the scope of this war expands from being a liberation of Kuwait into a full-fledged Arab-Israeli conflict. We'll also need to see within the next 4 or 5 hours, as daylight breaks in the Arab world, the kind of reaction from the Arabs, not only in the Gulf, but also in countries like Jordan, Yemen, Algeria, places that have showed some sympathy for Saddam Hussein, to see if this is going to create the kind of outrage, the kind of furor that Gary referred to earlier, if this is going to be a conflict that is judged as the West against the Arabs. And I think these are the issues that President Bush has to look at as he's evaluating what happens next.
All right, Robin Wright, we're going to go to Mike Betcher on the telephone right now. We've been able to get a telephone contact through to him, much to our relief. Mike Betcher, what can you tell us about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, apart from the fact that you are able to talk to us right now?
Tom, the air raid siren is still blowing. There has been no explosion, so I assume that no missile or airplane, enemy aircraft has struck anywhere near this location. People are in the bomb shelter at the present time. I am in a safe location at a phone, calling you now my protective gear at the ready. So we are fine at the present time. The sirens are still blowing, and everything's okay. I think everyone said a little prayer before they headed down. And so far, everything's okay, Tom.
Well, Mike, that's the best news that we've had so far this evening after that interruption, and we are...
Power went out, by the way. All power was gone. The lights went black. At that point, we gave up the ship on the roof of the hotel and headed down. And I'll stay on the phone here with you as long as I can.
All right, Mike, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to let you catch your breath a little bit, and we'll catch ours as well collectively here now that we have reestablished contact with you. In Baghdad, so far as we can tell from other news agencies, the hotel has not come under attack in any fashion. We're attempting to reestablish our contact there with NBC's Tom Aspel. Reports still coming out of Baghdad. The city took a big hit on the western edge by the international airport, where we believe there was a large military installation. And Fred Francis has been able to report to us that the first wave of attacks came from Tomahawk cruise missiles. They're low and slow, but very deadly, very tough to shoot down, and very accurate. At that, they cost $1 million apiece. They are launched from ships, in this case, the Tomahawk. So that's the military situation as we are able to determine it at this hour. That is what is going on in that part of the world. Let me go back now to Washington, D.C., where Ed Peck is standing by next to Robin Wright. We introduced him earlier as a man who served in the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and he's with us tonight as well. Ed Peck, let's go back to the mind of Saddam Hussein. Over the weekend, when I was in Baghdad, top Iraqi officials were telling members of the UN Secretariat staff that they believe that they can take 2 waves of attacks from the United States, emerge from their bunkers, and claim victory. Is that viable?
Viable option, I suppose, that he has after he considers all the other routes that are open to him. I would tend to think that one of the things that he's going to do first when he comes out of his bunker is call on the Arab world to rise up and support him, and to call on Muslims everywhere to do the same thing. If you remember back in 1967 in the Arab-Israeli war at that time, when the Egyptians accused the United States of taking a role on the Israeli side, they sacked and burned American embassies all across the North Africa and through the Middle East. Now, when it's the United States that's done it without Israel, so far as we know, I'm certain that Saddam Hussein can count on a very strong and very violent reaction from Muslims virtually everywhere. So that'd be one of the things he's going to do when he comes out.
And what are the prospects of that succeeding with the Arab masses, to say nothing of some of the other marginal leaders there?
Well, I think it's going to succeed very well. Well, fairly well, and that's not something that pleases me, of course, but I think that there's going to be a very strong emotional reaction on the part of all Arabs when they know that the United States has struck co-religionists, co-Arabs, co-ethnists, if you will. It's going to be a strong reaction. It depends, the strength of the reaction will vary from country to country, and it will depend to a great deal on what happens in the succeeding days. But I think that even in countries far removed from the actual conflict, and I mentioned Algeria that Robin Wright just mentioned a moment ago, the Algerians are not going to feel very happy about this at all, and the Americans are going to be the ones who will take the brunt of their reaction.
Thank you very much, Ed Peck and Robin Wright in Washington, D.C. Gary Sick would like to add something to that.
Just one point, and that is I think the place to watch is, first of all, tomorrow morning when things begin to break, will be Jordan, first of all, where the situation is already very, very delicate, and where the Palestinians can take to the streets and destabilize things. And the other is Egypt, where Saddam is not that popular, but we'll have to watch what happens there and whether Mubarak can handle the threat.
Another big part of the equation, of course, is what happens to Israel. We have NBC's Martin Fletcher on the line for us now. Of course, just last week, Tariq Aziz, the Iraqi foreign minister, was saying, yes, absolutely yes, we will attack Israel if we come under attack. Martin Fletcher, I can hear you in the background on the line. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you fine, Tom.
What's going on in Israel tonight?
Well, surprisingly little, Tom. We were expecting that the first move Saddam Hussein would be a rocket attack, a missile attack on Israel. That hasn't happened yet, as he promised. He, of course, said his first thing he would do would be to attack Tel Aviv. That hasn't happened. What that suggests is that the missiles in H2, H3 on the Iraqi border which is where Iraq would fire those missiles from, it appears those missiles were not ready to be fired, which was one Israeli fear. So now Israel has 5 hours to count down. That's the maximum time it takes to load the missiles, the Scud-Bs. It could take a shorter time, but that's the maximum time. So Israel will now wait 5 hours. If those missiles don't fall, it would then appear that in that first American attack on Iraq, included in the targets was H-2, H-3, the Iraqi missile launchers. Of course, Israel was saying very strongly to the United States that if Iraq launched missiles against Tel Aviv and they landed, Israel would retaliate. America asked Israel not to retaliate, to wait to give America the chance to take out those missiles. And as I say, now we're waiting to see what the result of the American attack is. If no missiles fall on Tel Aviv, that means then that Israel will probably be out of the war, no reason to take part, which of course would make Washington very happy indeed. We just heard there's a full curfew, news just in, Tom, a full curfew in the whole country. In the whole country of Israel, in the occupied territories. Nobody in the streets, everybody waiting to see whether the rockets will fall or not.
All right. Martin Fletcher, it's worth pointing out, I think, that American military experts were saying that the Scud missiles of the Iraqis should be sufficiently short-circuited that they wouldn't be very effective against Israel after the first wave of attacks. And, of course, that would apply to Iraqi air power as well. But there are other ways that the Iraqis could launch an attack against Israel.
That's right. The Air Force is the Iraqi Air Force is the other weapon, of course, that Israel's expecting. But Israel's much less concerned about the Air Force. Of those 700, I think the figure is 730 Iraqi warplanes that they have, very few would be directed against Israel, because the main brunt of the Iraqi defense has to be against the United States. And Israel is very confident that if airplanes from Iraq come over, they can be shot down before they reach Israel. Israel's much more concerned about the ground-to-ground missiles, the Scud-Bs, and in particular if they're armed with chemical warheads. That's the big fear Israel has.
All right. Martin Fletcher in Israel tonight. You'll be there on duty as this war, which has been launched against targets in Kuwait and Iraq, goes on. And at the Pentagon, NBC's Fred Francis with the latest for us. Fred?
Tom, just to follow up briefly on what Martin Fletcher said from Tel Aviv, the prime target, other than Saddam Hussein, a simultaneous target, would have been the Scud-B missiles, and they were located over here in southwestern Iraq in an area called H2 and H3. There were some 30 launchers in that area called H2 and H3 by oil pumping companies, and as you can see, a very easy flight over here. But those particular missiles, we were told weeks ago, the United States promised Israel that they would be among the first targets for U.S. warplanes, so we can only assume that because Martin Fletcher has not even heard an air raid siren, that those missiles were in fact launched. Now, I will tell you that the one word from the Pentagon in the last 15 minutes is that Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, will come into the briefing room at the Pentagon at 9:30 tonight, Eastern Standard Time, to brief after the President's announcement to the nation. And obviously we're waiting for that, but we do not expect to have details of how effective this initial wave of attacks has been, Tom.
Okay, Fred Francis, I'm still struck by the fact that that's rather a short order. NBC's Martin Fletcher in Tel Aviv. Martin?
Cheryl?
Martin?
Yep.
You're on the air. This is Tom Brokaw. What do you have for us?
Tom, the latest here is that the country has been told to get their gas masks ready. I have my gas mask here. We've been told to keep them in our hands, ready to put them on, but the order has not yet come over to put the gas masks on. That's the great fear, as I said before, that Israel has, that chemical war will begin. That would make Tel Aviv the first city in history, as far as we know, as far as our experts can tell us, ever to come under gas attack. The only village, there was once a village within Iraq that came under attack by the Iraqi army. This would be the first chemical war attack on a city in history.
All right. NBC's Martin Fletcher. And the reason, of course, that they are concerned about a gas or a chemical attack, maybe even a biological attack of some kind, is, first of all, the state of mind of Saddam Hussein. He'll do anything to get his way. He is an absolutely ruthless military commander. He used gas attacks on effectively his own countrymen, the Kurdish tribesmen, when he was at war with Iran during a dispute with them at that time. He's threatened to use gas again, but it must be pointed out that the gas attacks come from Scud missiles, and from missiles, they are not very effective, and they expect to be knocked out, and it's also not very directed. In other words, it can be diffused over a wide area. but it is an almost unimaginable fear that everyone has in that war theater.
General Michael Dewey.
At this hour, the attack has been underway for, we think now, probably a couple of hours. It's uncertain just about when it was launched. It certainly was not 7 o'clock when we heard from Marlin Fitzwater. I think it probably began at around 5 or 4:50 p.m. Eastern Time today, when planes and Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched at Baghdad, first of all. Let's show you a broader map of the Middle East so that you'll have some orientation now to know what we're talking about. The cruise missiles were launched at Baghdad to military installations there, and there is the map. As you can see, the topical and the geographical relief of it all. Kuwait is that tiny, oil-rich little country down there in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia just below it. And it is believed that the most green of the Iraqi troops are on the southern border of that yellow area called Kuwait. And they probably are taking a real pounding at this hour, possibly from the B-52s. All the way to Baghdad, then, cruise missiles were launched to go after radar installations and other military sites. There have been reports of really horrendous explosions going on in the western end of the city. Credit where it's due, CNN is now reporting that it is black in Baghdad, although some smoke has been spotted in the area. That may have been the first wave of attacks. We still don't know what the strategy is. The president could come out tonight at 9 o'clock, announce what has been done, and said, Saddam Hussein, we have given you one more warning. Now we ask you, are you ready to pull out of Kuwait? And if there is no reply, he could go at them again with even more firepower. This has always been what I've called the Gaddafi model. That we'll show you what we can do, and then you respond to that. NBC's Dennis Murphy is in Amman, Jordan tonight. That's a country that's caught between Israel and Iraq. And one of the reasons that it is so volatile in Jordan, of course, Dennis, is that the population may be as high as, what, 70% Palestinian there?
Well, the Palestine would say it's more like 45% Palestinian, but you were here last week. There's no question. You walk through the streets of Amman, Jordan, and you see Saddam Hussein's pictures everywhere, by the taxi stands, by the news stands. What you have here is politically two separate groups. There's a Muslim fundamentalist movement, and there's also a radical Palestinian movement on the left. And both have found common cause. They're both united against the United States. And King Hussein has had to run that very tough course, Tom, of trying to be a neutral, trying to be something for everyone here. The country, in a belated fashion, finally endorsed the UN sanctions. But at the same time, you had that support in the street for Saddam Hussein. And frankly, Tom, I'm not looking forward to the dawn here. This is a city, you look out from the 15th floor here at the hotel over Amman. This is, again, like a sprawling Los Angeles. You were here just the other day. And what we're afraid of is that when dawn comes, there's going to be some movement in the streets. The greatest fear, of course, is that the missiles would be launched to Israel, as Iraq has promised, that Israel would respond, and that Jordan would be pulled into the middle of all of this. The king said he knocked on every door for peace, and was disappointed that he wasn't able to come up with some solutions. But civil unrest is what we're looking at for here in the next few hours. But it's a city asleep right now, Tom. It probably does not know that they're at war.
Are you able to get any Jordanian radio or television broadcast at this hour, or is that all shut down?
No, the radio is on. They've been playing patriotic music for the last few minutes. Earlier they were playing excerpts of the King's speeches, but the last news at the hour we had was at 2 o'clock. That was 41 minutes ago. It's 2:41 now here in Amman, Jordan. And there was no news about the war. They said only that we are prepared to go to war.
All right, NBC's Dennis Murphy pointing out for us the difficulties of being in Jordan. It could become a battlefield between Iraq and Israel. It has not yet come to that. There's no indication that there's been any attack whatsoever on Israel. It is a primary target, the Iraqis promise, but they may not be able to launch attack in that direction. But if they do so, Israel has made it clear it will respond in kind plus. It listened to the appeal from the United States and said, if we're under attack, then what we're going to do is we're going to strike back and strike back hard. The animosity between the two countries is well known. Of course, it was Israel that took out the nuclear plant in Iraq several years ago now, because it was believed that Saddam Hussein wanted to use that to develop nuclear warfare. Gary Sick, your thoughts at these hours as a student of that part of the world and what's going on there tonight?
Two things, very briefly. One is that, in effect, this was a surprise attack by the United States. All of us, almost everybody in Washington and elsewhere, really expected the president to wait for some time. And one of the reasons we may not be seeing an attack on Israel is that I'm sure that those missile sites out there, which were the ones that would upset everything, if those missiles went off to Tel Aviv, nobody knew what the outcome would be. If those were not among the most intensely targeted areas, something was wrong. And the fact that no missiles have gone off yet at least suggests that something was done there. The other thing is that we really are going to have a period of calm here because everybody in the Middle East is asleep. And we will probably, the story on the political side will not really begin to emerge until about midnight or thereafter our time on the East Coast. And that's when we're going to be able to see what, in fact, does happen.
If we look at that with a Western mind, our immediate response would be to say, wait a minute, we have given fair warning to Saddam Hussein. We have told the Arab world what to expect. We have told the Arab masses in Egypt and Syria and Saudi Arabia and Iran, the other Muslim nations, that this guy is a threat to all of you as well. But are we to acknowledge as well that all that could go by the boards?
Absolutely. And at the same time that we've been making that point to them, they've been making the point in the street and with demonstrations and everything else that as far as they're concerned, any attack against the Arabs by the West is unacceptable, and they've put it in those terms. So all of our protestations aside, that's the situation that we're in. That doesn't mean that all of these governments are going to collapse all of a sudden, but it does mean that tomorrow and in the coming few days are going to be very, very dangerous indeed in any Arab country in the world.
A small but telling tale, I think. When I was in Baghdad over the weekend, I struck up a brief relationship, as you do, with an Iraqi citizen. I saw him 2 days running by happenstance, a university-educated man who said that he admired Americans and he liked it very much. He was very concerned about what was going on there. And then as I walked to my airplane at the end, I said, do you have a family? And he said, I have 3 small children. And I said, I hope that you'll be able to get out of harm's way. And he said, I think that we will be able to. And then a mask came down and he said to me, if something happens to my children, any one of them, I will fight you forever. And my children will fight you as well. And it seemed to me that that was probably representative of a lot of the feeling that goes on. It is a complex place. It operates to a different drummer than the Western cultures, and we have to be aware of that, too, I think, as we go on tonight. This is not might making right, necessarily, in the minds of the Arab masses.
And I think it deserves to be said as well that might is not irrelevant in this thing, and that the demonstrations and perhaps riots that we can expect tomorrow morning are not the end of the game either.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying from their point of view about how they're going to see it. Gary Sick is here. He will be with us all night long. And in Washington, his colleague in these studies, a man who has been in that part of the world a lot as well, Ed Peck, who served in the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. What are your thoughts? You have to be seeing Baghdad in your mind at this hour, Ed Peck.
Yeah, seeing Baghdad and wondering how they're taking it. One of the things that does cross my mind is the fact that the Iraqi people are inured to war. They had that 8 years of savagery with Iran. They are more accustomed to the losses of lives of loved ones and friends and neighbors. The Iraqis also got hit by missile and air attacks on a couple of occasions at least. So this isn't something that that is foreign to their experience as it would be to ours. And they're also a very tough people, known throughout the Middle East for the fact that they are tough, tenacious, proud, and the sorts of people who it is not wise to cross except when you have to. So that the man that you just mentioned, you having spoken to, who said he would never forgive us if anything happened to his children, evokes the idea that where we in the West tend to think more of our New Testament heritage, where you turn the other cheek and you let bygones be bygones and forgive and forget. The people of the Middle East are the people of the Old Testament, if you will, if the Muslims will let me say that, where they're much more of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and you don't forget, and you don't forgive, and you carry on the vendetta and the struggle long after people in the West would be prepared to say, all right, it's over, let's not worry about it any longer.
Ed Peck, thank you very much. We'll ask you to stay there as well tonight. Recordings on telephone calls that are being placed at Baghdad. This is what you hear if you try to dial into that Iraqi capital city. Due to an emergency situation in the country you are calling, your call cannot be completed at this time. Not unexpected. NBC's John Cochran at the White House right now. What's President Bush doing to prepare for his 9 p.m. address to the nation, John?
Well, he's sitting in his office right now with Vice President Quayle, Chief of Staff John Sununu, and his National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft. Let me run through a few things for you. Between 6 and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight, the president called congressional leaders, gave them their first word on the attack. The White House expected the first attack on Baghdad at 7 p.m. You know how they learned about it? They watched television, and they heard the reports coming from the reporters on the ground in Baghdad. They're saying here everything happened right on schedule. The president will be speaking at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That, of course, is what, a little over an hour and 10 minutes from now. He'll be speaking about 10 to 12 minutes. He wrote it all himself, went through 4 drafts. At the office, he walked out of his office about 4:30 this afternoon, both he and Vice President Quayle, knowing what was underway. The orders obviously had already been given some time before. They took some time out, went over to their respective homes, and returned at 6 p.m. When I say the president went home, he walked over to the mansion part of the White House before returning to his office. As for his mood, we're told he is calm, expectant, waiting for reports, and they have no important military reports yet. The president actually has been doing a lot of watching of television to see what, as I say, the people on the ground themselves have been reporting.
And Harry Summers.
I beg your pardon? Tom, I'm sorry I lost you.
John, just keep going.
I'm sorry. Marlon Fitzwater is briefing reporters right now. It's all happening as we speak before our eyes. They don't know how successful this mission is, and by the time the president goes on television, as I say, about an hour and 10 minutes from now, he's not going to know whether this was a completely successful strike. We also don't know what other targets there may have been other than Baghdad. I can tell you some things that the White House had said really is not a problem, and we had heard that it was a problem with the Israelis. The Israelis had complained that they weren't being clued in, as it were, on what our war plans were before the attack began. One thing the Israelis were worried about was that if, in fact, the Israelis felt in danger of those Iraqi missiles, they'd go in there with their jets and try to take them out. They might run into our planes there, and our planes and their planes might start firing on each other, or conceivably, I suppose, even collide into each other. Here at the White House, I'm told that they never regarded that as a serious problem. Their feeling was that the Israelis were trying to find reasons to get more information. Quite understandably, Israel has a deep national security interest here. The White House staffers I've talked to are not being critical of the Israelis. They say that's not a problem. What I don't know is how much information the Israelis have been given. Obviously, they're being given some. This is a very sensitive issue, Tom, because Arab countries are going to want to know whether or not the U.S. did this in cahoots with the Israelis, as you well know.
All right. John Cochran, you're absolutely correct in that. We want to give you an update on the situation now as you stand by there. It is called Operation Desert Storm. It has been underway now for almost 3 hours, we believe. It began with Tomahawk cruise missile attacks on the capital of Iraq, Baghdad, as you can see. That is an F-15 plane that we have flying over there. They were launched as well with long-range fuel tanks, probably to hit ground positions, possibly in southern Kuwait, but maybe military targets within Iraq itself. The primary objectives in the first wave appear to have been military installations and probably radar sites, because the radar would be crucial to the Iraqis in responding to any kind of an attack. There are now reports again coming out of Baghdad of a new wave of attacks underway. We do not know what that means precisely at this hour. The center of the city apparently still is intact. Saddam Hussein, where he is at this hour, we cannot say. We presume, of course, that he is in a bunker, possibly somewhere in the Baghdad area, but he could have gone to the mountains. He has retreats there as well. He is battle-hardened, 8 years against Iran. He's a man who fought and killed his way to power, beginning in a very small village in Iraq called Tikrit, and from there he built this enormous political and military power in the most ruthless possible fashion, killing anyone who stood in his way, saying, I know of the people around me when they're disloyal before they know. NBC's John Cochran at the White House.
Tom, we're just learning that the president has been working on the speech, which we'll hear later tonight. He's been working on it for 2 to 3 weeks. That gives us a lot of insight into his mindset. Obviously, he thought this was a likely possibility. You don't work on a speech for 2 or 3 weeks unless you think you're going to deliver it, although obviously hoped at the last minute that Saddam Hussein would withdraw his troops and he wouldn't have to go on the air with the speech of about 10 to 12 minutes duration. The few remarks that Marlon Fitzwater had a short time ago, that would be about almost almost an hour ago now. That was devised in a hurry. The president is still watching a lot of television. Incidentally, one of the reasons around here we suspected there would be no attack today is that Marlin Fitzwater came out to this podium behind me earlier today, this morning, and issued a personal appeal for journalists in Baghdad to leave. And later talking with Fitzwater privately, he said, listen, I'm speaking also on behalf of the president. He knows a lot of you guys. He knows a lot of you guys reporting from Baghdad. He's concerned about you. He thinks it's crazy that you're there. Fitzwater said, I tried to explain to him that's what you guys do for a living. That's the ethics of your profession, to be there where news is happening. And Bush was saying, try to get him out of there. However, the reason we didn't expect the attack today is there really was very little time for people to come out of Baghdad. Given the president's concern, we thought maybe he was going to hold off another day or two. So I would have to say most of us were caught by surprise here, Tom.
Thank you, John Cochran. We have some additional information for you. From a very high-ranking Arab source tonight, we are told that the Baghdad airport and a large number of missile batteries around it were the first targets. We're told that there was no ground resistance, that the attacks were successful. The early attacks were not massive, but they were concentrated and effective. That, as I say, from a high-ranking Arab source in a position to know. We'll tell you as well that in Tokyo and other places where the financial markets are open, it is chaos at this hour. The Tokyo market was off about 300 points at one point, and oil prices were up $3 a barrel. That is not unexpected, of course, in the first wave, the first flush of shooting, when there can be no certain outcome. The financial markets almost always are in some kind of havoc, and that certainly is the situation tonight. That could very well stabilize. We'll not know what happens in this country. Colonel Harry Summers is one of the best students of American military policy in this country. He's in our Washington studio right now. Colonel Summers, we have been talking about strategy all along. This business about using cruise missiles to go after other missile installations around the Baghdad airport and probably other sites. Come as any surprise to you?
Not at all. I think it's a very good use of trying to suppress their air defenses and pave the way for the manned bombers that follow.
Is there any possibility that they would do this kind of quasi-surgical strike, I suppose is the best way to describe it, as a kind of model of what can come next to get their attention, and then if there is no response politically from Saddam Hussein, they really pull the trigger?
I hope we're not falling into the mistake of using military forces as signaling devices, and we're using them properly as warfighting devices. That was a mistake we fell into in the Vietnam War, and it had disastrous consequences.
And in fairness to President Bush, he said that that would never happen in this case. Fred Francis and I were talking earlier about the attack on the Baghdad airport and the launching of what appeared to be ground-to-air missiles. It did appear from this distance, and this is all speculative, of course, that they wanted to light up the radar systems. Does that make sense to you?
Exactly so. The way you get them to activate their radars, because as you know, some of our so-called smart bombs and smart munitions hone in on these kind of radar sites and can take them out. So, and to do that, of course, you've got to get them to turn them on.
All right, we're going to show you now a map of the general area, if we can, an electronic map, Colonel Summers, and you and I are going to talk our way through it here for just a few moments about what we're... First of all, this is Baghdad itself. The United States Embassy and the British Embassy have been evacuated. I was there on Sunday at the American Embassy, and it was curious. The doors were open and the phone worked, but no one was at home. Books were left on the desks and so on. The president has to be very careful, doesn't he, here, when he's going after Baghdad, that he does not, in effect, cause so many innocent casualties that it could backfire on him.
Well, we know that they're going to use that as a propaganda weapon, as the North Vietnamese did, so that we've got to be very careful about collateral damage and civilian casualties. But having said that, they're almost inevitable because a surgical strike is almost a contradiction in terms.
All right, now let's look at a wider map, if we can, of that whole area so that we can see Kuwait and Iraq and everything else. Kuwait down there in the bottom, right up against the border of Saudi Arabia. They say that targets are being hit in Kuwait, too, tonight. What would you think those targets might be?
I would think it'd be their missile sites, their artillery, anything they have capable of striking our forces and taking them out to the degree that they can, and also, of course, some of their air defenses there as well.
We have had no reports of any ground movement on the part of the American military forces. I guess that comes as no surprise to you.
Not at all. It'll probably be some time before we see that.
All right. If Colonel Summers, if you'll stand by, we're going to go back to Saudi Arabia right now to NBC's Mike Betcher so we can get an update from there. They're back on the air. Mike, I don't hear any air raid sirens in the background. Breathing a little easier?
Yeah, a little easier, Tom. I can toss this thing next to me. You have to keep it close here. There could be another siren. Nothing hit. Apparently people are coming out of the shelter now, so it looks like the all clear came. When we spoke to you earlier, power went down, it went black. There was no explosion, no problem in that regard. I spoke to you from a phone up here. And everything is calm right now. We hear no jets taking off, no jets coming in. It looks like, at least in the early minutes of this conflict, here in northeast Saudi Arabia at Dhahran, we've survived it without any sort of a hit.
Yeah, and Mike Betcher, can you tell me as well what you are able to learn from the Joint Information Bureau? Those are the military public information officers who are located on the mezzanine of that hotel. Are they helpful at all at this hour?
Well, the Joint Information Bureau went down to the bomb shelter, as they well should, well armed. And I don't know if they've come back up yet. I'll have to go check in a few minutes, Tom.
Okay, NBC's Mike Betcher. We're going to go from there to the Pentagon, where Fred Francis has been talking to people who are in the nerve center effectively, although it's being run, this war out of Riyadh. It's being closely monitored by the Defense Department. Fred, what's the latest that we have?
Tom, this is a plan of long standing, we are told. The only thing that has changed in several months on this plan is target updates. Satellites where Saddam would be moving some of the mobile missiles, the mobile Scud missiles, and those were updated on a daily basis. Target updates for the Tomahawk cruise missiles. We can tell you from sources here at the Pentagon that this is a very massive attack. This is the attack, the one that has been planned for so long, that virtually every target of mass destruction in Iraq, those are his chemical factories, his biological weapons research factories, his at least 4 nuclear research factories and processing places that we know about, all of his munitions plants, all of those targets, very, very rich targets in terms of what the United States wanted to accomplish in the opening hours of combat, have been attacked in these opening hours, as well as the air bases, we are told here at the Pentagon. They have been attacked, and targets in and around Baghdad, we are told. We are also told that this is going to continue for several days. There will not be what we have heard today as a strategic pause where they would bomb just for a little while and then let up and see if Saddam cries uncle. We are told that this will be continuous, that it's a target-rich environment, a term used, and that this will go on for several days. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Well, I'm going to ask you about Kuwait and targets there.
Targets in Kuwait, only command centers. We are told that the troops, those young green troops in the trenches, have not been attacked, that only military division and corps headquarters in the rear areas have been attacked, and the mobile missiles have been attacked. So what they're trying to do is take out the leadership, the generals and colonels behind the lines, as well as their communications facilities and the mobile missiles, but the troops in the trenches have not been attacked. We did not expect that to happen in the opening hours, and I think that this president and what we've learned here in the last couple of days, they didn't want to kill tens of thousands of Iraqi soldiers if they could decapitate the leadership of the country, which is the primary goal.
Fred, is this an all-American Air Force, or are there British planes up there as well, and what about the Saudi fighters?
We are told that there are 200 to 300 Saudi fighters who had targets, sorties that they would have to go after. We are told that the British were also involved in the initial air attack. We do not know about the French, but we were told earlier in this week, when all was said and done, the French would fight. And, but we're going to have to wait and see on that. I would expect, Tom, that we're not going to hear in the 9:30 briefing from Secretary Cheney and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell, we will not hear a great many details because, quite frankly, they're running this war from Riyadh, and a lot of details are not going to come this way, at least for the next 24 hours, and certainly will not be released to the public.
All right, there are additional reports now coming out, Fred, that there is heavy bombing going on in and around Baghdad, so it is the massive attack that you have described for us. Colonel Harry Summers in Washington, D.C. has been consulting for NBC recently. He is a military affairs expert. Does this all add up for you, Colonel Summers? Well, he may have stepped away to make some telephone calls to find out what is going on. Colonel Summers, you heard Fred Francis?
I did, sure did. And as your earlier question, I think it's really coming down to the plan that we've discussed earlier and pretty much right down for the scenario that everybody's been talking about.
All out. Get as much damage done as you possibly can. go on for maybe a couple of days.
Exactly so. It's command and control facilities, establish air control, which is essential for everything that follows. I think it's just going right down the list.
All right, Colonel Summers, we're going to go to Saudi Arabia right now. NBC's Mike Betcher is on the Air Force from there. Mike, what do you have?
Well, we understand from a colonel in the Saudi Joint Information Bureau here at the hotel that there has been no retaliation in Saudi Arabia by Iraq. No missiles have struck Saudi territory. No planes have made it across the border from Kuwait to here. So far as we know, so far as this colonel has told us, there has been no retaliation inside Saudi Arabia yet.
And what about the success of the attacks within Kuwait and Iraq? Can he give you any judgment on that?
We're trying to get that now. I have nothing on that yet.
Okay, we're going to go to Martin Fletcher in Israel. The last time we talked to him, Martin said there was an advisory to keep your gas mask at the ready. Any additional or higher order of alert in that country?
No higher order of alert, Tom, but we did find out that President Bush did call Prime Minister Shamir early this evening to warn him of the American attack on Iraq. And it was a result of that. Shamir went on television to warn Israelis, not that the attack would happen, of course, to give the game away, but to tell them, to reassure them that Israel was in a perfect state of readiness and could repel any Iraqi attack if it came. Since then, there's been a state of emergency declared in Israel. People have been advised to stay in their homes. Only essential personnel should be out in the streets. Of course, that's not very difficult. Right now, it's 2 o'clock in the morning here, but at dawn, that's about 5 hours away here in Israel. That's the time span for which Israel is preparing to see whether or not Iraqi missiles land in Israel. That's the time, 5 hours, it takes to arm Iraqi warheads in western Iraq. So if no missiles have landed by daybreak in Israel, it looks like Israel will be out of the war.
And Martin Fletcher, can we assume that Israeli jet fighters have been scrambled tonight, that they have additional heavy air security underway now?
Well, it's certainly a fair assumption, Tom, but I haven't heard that yet. But it's certainly the way Israelis operate. They've had pilots rotating in cockpits on the ground for about a week now. Permanently, they can scramble their planes within 30 seconds. They've had electronic observation planes and fighter planes permanently in the air. It's certainly a safe bet that they've increased the numbers of planes in the air ready to intercept Iraqi fighters or bombers. But as I say, we have no news of it yet. An army briefing is expected momentarily.
Okay, we'll hear back from you after that time. Martin Fletcher, who is in Israel tonight, of course, that has been one of the many unknown factors here. It is potentially so explosive because the Iraqis promised to bomb Israel. The hope on the part of the Iraqis would be that they would be able to then drag Israel into the war. That would set off a backfire of reaction on the part of the Arab masses. It would be very hard for, say, Egyptian President Mubarak, as closely tied as he is to the United States, to hold his people on line. We don't know what happened to Hafez al-Assad of Syria under those circumstances. At the Defense Department, Fred Francis. Fred?
Well, Tom, NBC News correspondent Catherine Kirk has been working the halls of the Pentagon for the past hour and a half, and a senior Pentagon official has told her just recently that the prime target that this building had for many, many months and had promised to Israel that they would take out those Scud missile sites in southwestern Iraq. We do not know whether that has been successful, but we continue to hear from Martin Fletcher in Israel that there are no air raids, and so we presume that all of American technology and all of American targeting were focused on those missiles just across the Jordanian border in southwestern Iraq, and that was one of the prime targets. Catherine Kirk also reports that all of the other targets in Kuwait, the command and control sites, as well as the mobile Scud missiles, the ones in southwestern Iraq were fixed launchers. They have mobile missiles in Kuwait. Those were also prime targets. So it does not surprise me what Michael Betcher reports, that the missiles fired, there was nothing fired into Saudi Arabia, and it does not surprise me that Saudi Arabian airspace has been violated. You must remember, Tom, there are 2,200 American fighters and bombers based on the Arabian Peninsula and or in the seas just around them. Roughly 1,700 in the Arabian Peninsula and 400 to 500 on Navy carriers, 3 in the Red Sea and 3 in the Persian Gulf. A tremendous, absolutely tremendous collection of air defense, and so it doesn't surprise me that for the moment nothing has been fired into Saudi Arabia. Tom?
All right. Fred Francis, thanks very much. Again, we have a very substantial Arab source within the Arab diplomatic community, saying that in his 9 p.m. speech, the president will offer to stop for anything for a few hours or up to a day to give Saddam Hussein a chance to pull out of Kuwait, or else, having demonstrated to him the kind of damage that he can invoke. Fred Francis, let's go back to you for a moment. We've been hearing now from Mike Betcher tonight, from Martin Fletcher in Israel, from everyone. It is the great unthinkable on the minds of us all. What happens if he gets off some kind of a gas attack? Realistically, what are they saying about the Pentagon, about the chances of that being effective on the part of Saddam Hussein?
Well, there are two levels of this, Tom. The first level, both the Israelis and the CIA have said repeatedly that Iraq has never demonstrated the ability to use chemical warheads on his long-range or his medium-range missiles. He's never demonstrated that ability. And even if he were able to get a couple of those missiles off with chemical warheads into Riyadh or Dhahran or in that area, what we know about these missiles is they are notoriously inaccurate. If one were fired at a stadium, say, it might hit within a mile of that stadium. The second thing we know about chemical warheads on these missiles is that these chemical warheads dissipate very quickly, especially in the kind of environment you have in a desert. So they're not particularly lethal weapons. And the second layer of chemical attack is the one that is most effective, the ones that Iraq has used most effectively, and that is firing chemical warheads on artillery shells. Saddam Hussein did that to great effect against the Iranians during the Iran-Iraq War, but again, U.S. forces are not within range of those artillery pieces in southern Kuwait. So the bottom line of all this, Tom, is yes, it's good to have those gas masks, and that's the real scare, but it's just a scare. It's not a real lethal threat, pinpoint targeting, and in this building, and at least at the CIA, and even the Israelis, we're never totally concerned about the chemical threat.
Fred Francis, thanks very much. We know that you have additional work to do there, and you'll be back to us momentarily. Gary Sick, who, as I say, was a former member of the National Security Council staff, an expert on that part of the world. What happened with Iraqi casualties during the war with Iran?
Well, it's really an interesting point, because the point has been made that Iraq is prepared to take substantial casualties. In the Iran-Iraq War, over a period of 8 years, Iraq lost about 130,000 people, spread out over that 8-year period, which is about a little over 2% of the population, something like what the U.S. did in the Civil War. That was the level of attack that
very, very high price.
It's a very high price. And what's amazing is that he's been able to take his population back into war again after having experience like that. The other thing is the experience that they had with missiles. Iraq launched something like 200 missiles in the period of a month and a half against Tehran. And those missiles certainly scared people, drove them out. Not one of them had gas on it. And ultimately, it didn't really destroy the city. That was 200 in a relatively short period of time. And they were not able to really do that much damage. So the missiles should be regarded primarily as a terror weapon, rather than as a weapon that is really likely to be able to do any enormous damage.
If they take the kind of hit that we think is underway right now, massive bombing, really terrifying explosions on the edge of the city, big damage all over Iraq, military installations. People will be coming awake this morning and seeing what is going on. They're probably huddled in doorways right now. How long can Saddam Hussein hang on to his people?
You know, I'm not sure that the people in Baghdad will wake up terrified and aware of massive damage around them, because if I really understand the plan, they're not going to be going after targets in the city. For instance,
they'll be hearing what's going on.
They'll be hearing. Oh, of course. But Iran, in the course of that 8-year war, fired between 50 and 100 missiles at Baghdad, which came in over time, and again had almost no effect on the outcome. The thing that I think that the Iraqis are not expecting is the sheer volume, the magnitude of this, which would be more in the first few minutes than Iran threw at them in the entire history of that war. And during that entire history of the war, Iraq had air superiority. They were able to keep all of the Iranian planes pretty much out of their airspace after the first few months of that war. This is a completely new situation for Iraq. So The experience that they had in the Iran-Iraq War doesn't necessarily translate into their experience right now.
It should come as no surprise, after all, maybe not to the Iraqi people who are not able to read and to see CNN, which is available to the Iraqi leadership there. It should come as no surprise, however, to the Iraqi leadership that this kind of an attack is underway.
Oh, yes. No, I mean, the Iraqi leadership had every reason to know the magnitude, the nature of what was coming. And it still remains to be seen whether Iraq was itself planning to launch an attack of its own. We haven't seen that at all. But as I say, this was really a surprise attack on their part, on the U.S. part, moving in faster, hitting them harder, and catching them basically before their missiles could in fact be used against any other targets. Thus far, I mean, so far, so good.
All right, thanks very much, Gary Sick, who is going to be with us throughout the evening here as we keep track of what is called Operation Desert Storm. The president is expected to address the nation in about 50 minutes at 9 Eastern Time. He will report on the success, as he knows it at that time, we trust, of Operation Desert Storm, and he will tell us what his plan is next. We have been told by one major Arab diplomatic source tonight that, in fact, he will probably make an offer to Saddam Hussein to pause for a few hours or a day or so to give him an opportunity to reconsider a decision that he so far has resisted, that is to pull his troops out of Kuwait. The initial attack came as a cruise missile attack. We're told now that there is heavy bombing going on in the Baghdad area, a very substantial amount of bombing, primarily at... Okay, Kent and Betcher are standing by now in Saudi Arabia, I'm told. That is Arthur Kent and NBC's Mike Betcher, who are two of our correspondents there. Mike and Arthur, are you hearing anything from the Joint Information Bureau, the military information people upstairs?
Well, Tom, they've more or less closed down that avenue of information. What we're seeing here is very carefully planned and orchestrated program by the U.S. military to make sure that information is given out in a very measured way from the top. We saw that earlier this evening when there was obviously a lot of activity in the skies. Military people here in Saudi Arabia, in northeastern Saudi Arabia that is, would have no comment and signal us to Riyadh. They at that time were signaling back to Washington. So there is a chain of confirmation, a release of information that you might expect in this kind of instant warfare to make sure that just that kind, quality, and amount of information is given out as the attack proceeds. But little by little, we are getting some pieces of information. We expect that as the attack continues, and we are again hearing some F-15 interceptors taking off from this air base.
Yes,
see a pair of them, Mike, right?
Two afterburners, so it doesn't look like an F-15.
Right. We'll be getting more information, Tom, we expect, as the night goes on.
All right, it's worth pointing out that Mike Betcher and Arthur Kent were part of that group that had a real scare some time ago now. A few moments ago, there was an air raid siren that went off in Saudi Arabia, and they were instructed to go down into the bomb shelter. This is what it was like. Chilling moment for all of those people in Tehran. Of course, they believed that they were safe. It turns out that they were, and we expect that they will continue to be because it's a very, very heavily secured area. We're going to go now to Camp Pendleton with a Marine family. The Marines, we believe, are up on the front lines and not yet in action. There's been no indication whatsoever that there has been any kind of ground force movement at this time. So let's go to Margaret Larson now at Camp Pendleton. Margaret?
Tom, I'm in the Comer household where I've been for the past 2 days talking to Tammy Comer and her 4 children. Tammy's husband, Carl, is a Marine who is deployed in the Persian Gulf. And as we've been discussing, this is very much like a death in the family. It's something you know is going to come, but still it is a terrible shock when it finally happens. Tammy, what's your reaction to the news today?
It really hasn't hit me yet. I think in my heart it's a sign of relief that we know it was going to happen, and it's happened. I'm happy that it's happened, that they can go in there, they can get their job done, and bring our loved ones home.
The wait has been excruciating for the families here in this apartment complex, where many of the wives are military wives, the children waiting for their fathers to come home.
Yes.
But you're pulling together.
We are. This evening we plan to get together and give each other support. We were together earlier when we got the news. A lot of children were with us. My phone's been ringing off the hook. Family members have called. People have called to give their support. We need anything to holler. And we're just going to be one big family and hang in there together.
Before Carl left, he gave you some advice. He asked you to do something for him. What was it?
To be strong. To be real strong. So we're going to do that.
Well, it's certainly what I've been watching you do for the past couple of days. Wish you the best. The families here at Camp Pendleton, 20 to 30,000 Marines deployed from this area, have nothing to do now but wait for additional word and to hope that their loved ones will indeed come home, Tom.
Margaret, I wonder if they take any comfort in the fact that the strategy is to have a very heavy bombing attack first, and the last idea is to send in the ground forces. Does that reassure them at all?
Absolutely it does. Not only are many of these men on the ground, but some of them are on ships out in the Gulf, and they are taking a lot of comfort in the fact that the airstrikes are going to make that an easier road for them if indeed they do have to go in. That is something that comforts them.
All right, thank you very much, Margaret Larson at Camp Pendleton in California. The first Marines to land there, of course, were from Camp Pendleton and from 29 Palms. They had had extensive desert training, and they got off the airplane sometimes, in some instances, off 747s from United Airlines, and within 24 hours they had gone from California and peacetime to the Persian Gulf and the prospect of war, a war that is underway tonight, Desert Storm, a war from the air at this hour. We'll be hearing from President Bush, we think, in about 40 minutes or so. We have a report now from NBC's Tom Aspel that we recorded earlier at 7 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, the first wave of attacks. This is how Aspel described them from his hotel room in Baghdad.
Now, the sky just full of tracer now. And and there's a very big explosion right up to the west of the city there, just winking. Here it comes now, Tom. There's a very big bang right out on the western side of the city. And now guns, there you go. You can hear that, Tom. There are guns, and there's more explosions on the western edge of the city. There's red tracer, white tracer. It's going up all over the place. I haven't seen a missile yet. Another big green flash out towards the airport. You can only see in one direction here, Tom, but let me see if I can get just over towards the edge of the window. Maybe you can hear this. Wow, what a sight. What a sight. A lot of flak going up in the air, all these tracers crossing, white blinking. Two big explosions. I can now see a pool of smoke out there. One was red, one was green, maybe some kind of flare. We're just not up on a war of the 90s. You know, we don't know what these explosions mean. We've never seen them before. We don't know how to recognize exactly what they are.
Are you hearing any airplanes?
Not yet, Tom. We do not hear any airplanes yet. Another big flash on the edge of the city.
That was NBC's Tom Aspel tonight about an hour and 20 minutes ago, and then his line went dead. So far as we can tell, it's been very tough, although some news agencies are getting reports out of there. It's been very tough to get any communications out of there whatsoever. In Washington, D.C., retired Colonel Harry Summers, who teaches at the War College, a military expert, and Ed Peck, who is at the Foreign Service, who is chief of mission in Baghdad at the embassy at this time. We had this report from a gentleman, I will describe him as a very senior Arab diplomat, that the president will go on television tonight and make an offer. This has not been confirmed by the White House. This is what we're told by the Arab diplomatic community, that after this initial wave of bombing, he'll pause and say, okay, now do you understand? Are you going to get out of Kuwait? Does that make sense to you, Colonel Summers?
It really doesn't. From a military perspective, it'd be disastrous. But of course, war is a political act, not a military act, so there are other factors at work here.
All right, Ed Peck, you wear the political hat of the two there. What would be your judgment?
I think that's probably a reasonable thing to do from the political perspective, to show again that we're trying to take every possible step to avoid real cataclysm out there. I would guess offhand that it won't be effective. I don't know just how much we're carrying out the attacks, but it's too soon, too little. that's a tough bunch of folk out there.
Colonel Summers, the concern obviously is, I guess, that the Iraqis could reorganize themselves, right?
Exactly. They, as the North Vietnamese did, every time we had a bombing pause, they used it to resupply, re-equip, and to mount a very effective propaganda campaign against the United States. And I think we can see this coming. Every civilian casualty that they take, they'll be paraded before the cameras. So that's the kind of thing we can see in the immediate future.
All right, Colonel Summers and Ed Peck, your colleague on this evening is Gary Sick. He's with us here in New York. Gary, you were just saying that you were in Cairo at the beginning of the '67 six-day war. What was it like there?
Oh, I remember very clearly the reports that were coming out from Baghdad are very reminiscent of the kind of things we had. I was actually standing on top of the American embassy as the Israeli planes came in on the side of the city and struck the airport. And you were aware that this was going on, and you could see the planes off in the distance in the daylight, and you could also hear some explosions off in the distance. But your real danger was, in fact, the shrapnel falling from the air, from the air defense forces firing off indiscriminately at these planes. And the planes were not coming into the city. They were not attacking. And in fact, a lot of things were going on pretty much as usual in the city at the same time.
Colonel Summers, we're going to go back down to Washington to you now. What are the chances that ground war can be avoided in your judgment?
Well, there is a chance. There's always been the hope that the Iraqi armed forces would collapse under the kind of attack that they're going to come under, the very massive attacks which have not yet come against their military forces. So there's that hope, but I think it's a rather long hope, and I think we have to at least to prepare for a ground war to follow up this air attack.
All right, Colonel Summers, thanks very much. We have additional reports now from Baghdad that the city is taking another very tough wave of attacks. That's about the third or fourth, as I can count them. We want to go to Saudi Arabia now, to NBC's Arthur Kent, where there are more air raid sirens at this hour. Arthur?
Tom, there's some activity. We're hearing some noise across the horizon. Indeed, we expect more of these Saudi civil defense drills. At present, they are only drills. We don't we don't have any reason to expect that any of Saddam Hussein's rockets will make it through U.S. air defenses. Nevertheless, the Saudis and the hotel management here where we are based are taking every precaution. And of course, when the sirens were going off earlier, the drill has been, as everybody in this area has practiced before, to reach for your gas mask if you don't already have it on a hip, and head into the hotel, down the stairway, and into a secure spot in the basement. It's very much a regimented thing, as you might expect. People are urged to stay calm. The gas masks, which most of us have had a lesser...
Whoops. Well, that's an interruption. We think it's just the satellite going down. No cause for undue worry there in Tehran. That's the area right up on the Persian Gulf. We can show you now some of the planes that have been taking off tonight from that area. The 1st Tactical Fighter Squadron Fighter Wing out of Virginia is based there. Colonel Broom, they've been there from the earliest days possible. They had to get control of the air. 2 big rear engines on those F-15s. It's got a twin tail on it. Those guys have very sophisticated radar on board and very heavy weaponry as well. We have a report now from NBC's Martin Fletcher in Israel. The Israelis, of course, have extraordinarily good intelligence in that area. He tells us that most of the targets have already been destroyed, including nuclear and chemical installations. F-111, F-17 stealth bombers started to fly the 2nd phase. The British military communications network intercepted here by a ham radio operator. They've been listening and monitoring that in Israel. Martin Fletcher, based on what you're hearing on the radio intercepts, it's going so well so far?
Well, Tom, we have that one report from our radio operator who's intercepted the British military communications network. It seems as if it's going exceptionally well. There's been a report just now on Israel television, I can't vouch for it myself, in which they say that the missile launchers in western Iraq, H-2, were hit, and the Israelis' intelligence says that the missiles were not armed at the time they were destroyed. So that indicates that the Iraqis were not ready for the attack. And it also suggests that there is no way that those missiles will be launched at Israel.
All right, you're hearing that from what, British military radio transmissions?
British military radio transmissions said that gave the first part of my report, which is that the targets mostly are being destroyed, including nuclear and chemical facilities. And the ham operator, who has been regularly monitoring military communications for us, gave us the second report about the destruction of the weapons, which had not yet been readied.
Martin Fletcher, any additional briefings from the Israeli military authorities at this hour?
Well, they keep saying they're going to make a military briefing any moment, and it has not yet taken place. We're still waiting for it. Another report, Tom, I can say, is that there have been very few casualties, we understand, in Iraq for the time being.
All right, Martin Fletcher in Tel Aviv tonight. We'll know that you'll want to go off and get some additional information from the Israeli point of view. The monitoring devices out there, both civilian and official, are up and very active. Prime Minister Shamir, we're told, and Defense Minister Aarons were at their homes tonight, receiving information on what is going on. Israel very much on guard and seems to be, at this moment, out of danger from an attack from Iraq. And that, of course, would have started a whole different phase and made this already very dangerous and complex situation all the more so. At the White House, NBC's John Cochran is there. John, the president is due in, what, 35 minutes or so? Do we expect this to be a long or a short speech? And have you learned any of the material that may be in it?
Well, we think it'll be about 10 to 12 minutes long. He will start at 1 minute past the hour, straight up and down. And we are told, as far as how long this campaign will last, the president's press secretary says, we hope it won't be too long. As the president has said, it's going to be swift and massive. We're not going to have another Vietnam. Bush will be awakened during the night if there are any major developments. Right now, he is in his office with him, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, John Sununu, the White House Chief of Staff, Vice President Quayle, watching television, apparently still doing some fine-tuning of his remarks. Fitzwater also said, we are just starting this. No one anticipated this was going to be easy. It's not a case of relief around here. It's a case of anticipation. It's just beginning. There are many sleepless nights ahead for all of us. And Jim Miklaszewski is going to have some sleepless nights ahead, too, has just been on the phone. Jim, what have you heard? Jim Miklaszewski, the other White House correspondent.
John, I just got some information. It's pretty hastily scrawled, so you're going to have to bear with me. But as far as we know right now, U.S. officials tell us that so far there have been no U.S. planes that have taken any hits, none that have been shot down. So far it appears that the Iraqis have not responded with any kind of significant firepower. They have not launched any of their fighter jets, nor fired any of their missiles in the direction of U.S. forces at this time. We're also told that under this scenario, as the attack is going on in Baghdad and other locations within Iraq, that attacks are going on simultaneously in Kuwait. We're also told by U.S. officials that this scenario called for an allied response, which would include attacks by British fighter jets and by Saudi fighter jets. Now, we have no confirmation on that, but that was the original scenario. But I think the significant thing at this point is, as far as U.S. officials know, information they're getting back from the Gulf is that so far, no U.S. jets have been shot down in this action.
All right, we want to tell you, Jim Miklaszewski and John Cochran, we do have a report now from Bahrain that a squadron of Tornado GR-1 fighters, that's the top British fighter, did take off from there, and they have refueling capacity as well. Britain has about 35,000 men and women on duty in the Persian Gulf tonight. That's the second largest contingent after the Americans, which have more than 400,000. NBC's Fred Francis is at the Pentagon. Fred?
Tom, we can just continue exactly what Jim said, that it's a total involvement of all forces, more than 2,500 warplanes from the United States, from Britain, from France, from Saudi Arabia, even Kuwaiti fighters that escaped on August 2nd have taken part. And I want to show you this. It's a rough map, but it gives you the totality of the kinds of targets that are being hit, not just Baghdad here, but we're talking about targets throughout Mosul and all around Mosul, several nuclear research facilities, SAD-16, a large research and development facility just north of Mosul for chemical weapons. Those are the kinds of targets that have been hit all over Iraq. Tom?
Thank you very much, Fred Francis. I'm going to take just a moment here because we have, as a guest who has just arrived, we'll get a microphone on him, Mohammed Abul Hassan, who is the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United Nations. It is his country, of course, that President Bush made his announcement tonight that is being liberated. And Mr. Ambassador, welcome, first of all. When did you learn that this attack was going to be underway?
Well, I learned only at 7 o'clock sharply when the first piece of news came on one of the networks. That's the first information which I have received.
Any report on how well it's going?
Well, we are following what you are, broadcasting. I did not have except 2 phone calls from Taif, where the government
Saudi
is
Arabia.
Yes.
We have to explain that Taif is in Saudi Arabia, and that's where the emir and other members of the royal family and the government are now.
I talked to them there. They are following, the operation. They are hoping that it will achieve its goal with the least casualties possible.
Mr. Ambassador, what happens next? If this is successful, what happens to Kuwait? What does your government do about making it, I suppose, more acceptable both to the United States democratic values and to the rest of the Arab world?
Well, let me tell you, Tom, the system which we have, it is a democratic system. It is an acceptable system. It has been hailed by the United States, by other Western countries. It has been a model for the Arab world. If it was not for Iraq-Iran war, which forced a suspension of the parliamentary system which we had, we could have continued the path which we were. Definitely after liberation of Kuwait, it will be back again to a parliamentary system with the constitution which is still in force.
And Mr. Ambassador, are you prepared to make any kind of a deal with Saddam Hussein?
Well, a deal which contained any concession, definitely not. A deal which solved the existing problem according to the international law and justice, definitely we are for that. Not because, Security Council resolution asks for, but also because we have registered our readiness and we embarked on that kind of negotiation 15 days before the aggression, and only 48 hours before the start of aggression, we started a face-to-face negotiation with them in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
But would you be willing to give Iraq, whether Saddam Hussein survives or not, and that's an open question tonight, would you be willing to give Iraq more access to the Ramallah oil fields, for example, or to the islands, Bubiyan and others?
Well, definitely, we are not willing to give any concession whatsoever. These are Kuwaiti territory. It has been, documented through agreements and conventions signed by both my government and his government and the Iraqi government, deposited to the United Nations. It should not be taken that these matters are subject for compromises. We negotiate about them, about the demarcation of the zone, which they refused always to sit and talk about it, but to give concession, whether through Rumaila, oil field or Bubiyan, this is totally rejected, not only by the government, but by the people, and it's against the Constitution itself.
Mr. Ambassador, when do you expect that you'll be able to go home again?
Well, I hope that the sooner the better. I hope within a very few coming days.
Thank you very much, Mohammed Abul Hassan, who is the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United Nations, with us tonight. This is a big night for you, obviously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To you as well. Let's go to Saudi Arabia, to Dhahran. That's the big air base, of course, right up on the Persian Gulf, a major port. It's the major staging area for the United States forces. They landed there and took off from there. That's Mike Betcher on your left and Arthur Kent on your right. Mike Betcher, late information for us?
Really none, Tom, I'm sorry to say. There have been a few more takeoffs and no incoming jets that we have seen. We have a Marine posted here now in a flak vest and his M16 to tell us what air raid warning is real and which one is a drill. So we should take care of that problem.
Well,
Arthur,
what do you mean? What's the difference between a real air raid warning and not? I mean, when the last one went up, how did you not know it was not real?
We didn't know till, we didn't know till a lot later.
Was that a drill?
Tom, I think what we're seeing here, yes, is
we didn't know it was a drill.
Extensive drilling by the Saudis, and they're not going to tell us which one is real and which one is not, of course, because they're trying to encourage everyone to head for those shelters and cooperate in the event of an actual attack taking place. But Mike, I think we're going to experience frequent power outages here. They're going to cut us off with no warning. We're going to be hearing these sirens repeatedly, and it's just a case of trying to sensitize everyone here to the fact that there is a chance is always there in warfare, that once you start an operation of this size, someone with an armed force as large and as complex as Saddam's can strike back.
You know, Tom, Arthur and I were talking a second ago, and we looked out towards the city, and you'd expect a city that could possibly be under attack would black out all lights. Everything's on. The highway lights are on, the runway lights are on, every light in town is on. So they certainly must feel, Arthur, that they have a lot of confidence in their air defenses.
That's right. I think what we'll see in a short time, perhaps, is some aircraft returning from that early scramble. They went out, as we've heard, heavily armed. If they are expending those arms, dropping bombs, or intercepting enemy aircraft, Iraqi aircraft, they'll certainly have to be coming back here to reload. If not, if the aircraft we saw from this airbase, Tom, going out were meant to be posted on guard duty, as it were, on the border, they may be refueling in midair. They may be up there for very many hours, patrolling the border to ensure that there isn't a strike across by those Iraqi warplanes.
You know, Tom, talking about these being drills or for real was real enough. So, you know, you just have to react the way you've been taught here, and everyone knows the procedure, and we'll try to live by it.
All right, thanks very much, guys. We'll bring you up to date on some other things that are going on. The explosions, we're told, have not been happening within the Baghdad city proper, but they have been happening around Baghdad, not in the city itself. Turkey, the government of Turkey, which is on the northern border of Iraq, it's the only NATO country with a border with Iraq, early Thursday set up a crisis center to track the attack on Iraq, and that's another major staging area. Speaker Tom Foley was called by the White House this afternoon at 5:30, told to get on a secure telephone and talk to the president. He did. That's when he was. That's when he learned that there would be probably an attack tonight. Gephardt, who is the Richard Gephardt of Missouri, who is the House Democratic leader, he was called to the White House. So was Bob Byrd, who is the #2 Democrat in the Senate leadership, Intelligence Chairman David Boren, and Bob Dole, who is the Senate Republican leader and has been the advance guard from a political point of view for President Bush. He was summoned as well to the White House. The Senate President Pro Tem is Bob Byrd. The ham radio operator that we have working for us in Israel is now quoting British military radio frequencies as saying the attack so far has destroyed the nuclear reactor in West Baghdad, chemical weapons stores, H-2 and H-3 missile sites in western Iraq. Those were the missile sites that the Israelis were especially concerned about. So the attack has been underway now, we think, for almost 4 hours. We believe that it was launched at around 5 Eastern time. We began to hear about it. First inklings just shortly after 6 tonight. It's called Operation Desert Storm. That's the lay of the ground, as you can see. Most of the attack was launched from at sea, Tomahawk cruise missiles, or from bases within Saudi Arabia, on targets in Kuwait, that tiny little country down in the lower right-hand corner, which has been the cause of this massive, what amounts to world attention war. In Riyadh is Charles McLean of NBC News. Riyadh is important, of course, because that's the city from which the command and control is operated. General Norman Schwarzkopf is running that operation for the United States. Charles McLean, are you hearing anything there? Are they keeping you up to date on what is going on?
Well, Tom, the first thing we heard were planes flying overhead sometime after midnight our time. That would be after about 4 in the afternoon your time. We're told here that the planes we were hearing were not attack fighters. They were, in fact, refueling planes and some AWACS. That pretty much got everybody out of bed, but we haven't had a military briefing yet. We've been told here that we won't be briefed by the military until after President Bush and perhaps the Pentagon have spoken.
And Charles McLean, are you getting any access to give us a word picture, if you will, of the situation in Riyadh, where you are. Are you at the Saudi Defense Ministry?
Right now, I am at the briefing room, Tom, where we will expect to hear from the military sometime soon. the hotel here where the briefing room is located and where we stay has been sort of frenzied. We had an air raid drill ourselves here. We're all in our chemical weapon suits. We're carrying our gas masks. And we're expecting that we're going to be hearing from the military soon, so everybody wants to stay pretty close to the briefing room.
Okay, Charles McLean, who is in, as you just heard, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where the command and control is being run by the United States. There was a large, complex military situation, and there was some concern on the part of military experts because there were so many, not just American forces in play here, but other forces as well. Even the Argentines sent 2 battleships into the Persian Gulf area. NBC's Fred Francis at the Pentagon. Any late report on how well it's going, Fred?
No, just some buzzing all over the building that things are looking very good. And we had been told about an hour ago, a senior official told Catherine Couric that the key targets were those that we had talked about earlier, all of the nuclear, biological, and chemical sites, as well as the Scud missiles in the Iraqi Air Force. Just one observation I would make, Tom, there seemed to be such a high confidence in this that much to all our surprise, the United States government and the Saudi government allowed all this to be broadcast even while the planes were taking off. An extraordinary confidence going into what we had all expected to be a very thick Iraqi air defense. But we have not heard one report from the Pentagon that the United States has lost one plane in this first almost 4 hours of military action. And so it's sort of upbeat here. Tom?
All right, Fred Francis, thanks very much. Let me ask you, if it does go as well as they think that it is, the chances that the president will then call for a pause of some kind to say to Saddam Hussein, you now have seen what we can do even more, get out of Kuwait. What do they think in that building about that scenario?
Only after the battle damage assessments would that even be considered. The Saudi government and the Israeli government were just adamant that the key targets had to be taken out, all the missiles, all the nuclear, chemical, and biological facilities. So after the battle damage assessment, and it'll be approximately 2 hours now, and the satellites will start taking pictures, and RF-4 reconnaissance planes, incidentally, reservists will be flying those reconnaissance planes from Reno, Nevada, will be flying over some of these targeted sites, taking pictures to see if in fact they have been destroyed. One of the problems with using Tomahawk cruise missiles and attacking at night using just your radars is you don't get a real good assessment of how, if you hit your target, especially with a Tomahawk cruise missile called a fire and forget weapon, you know, it is computer guided to within 25 feet of a target. But nobody really knows until a pilot or a satellite takes a picture and see what has happened. So only later in the day and perhaps later tomorrow afternoon, when they look at all these pictures and they see, did we get the targets that we went after, and can we even demand a surrender or demand that Saddam Hussein give up? And I don't think that will happen. The president may make the offer, but the offer won't be real until all the targets have been destroyed. Tom?
Okay, Fred Francis, thanks very much. We now want to bring you up to date. We have about 18 minutes to go before we hear from President Bush. He'll be speaking to the country directly from the Oval Office. He is a combat veteran himself, of course, decorated during World War II. He has been in office now just about 2 years. We've had 2 very substantial military operations. This one is major. A year ago at this time, you'll recall, there was another very significant operation against Panama. The president, as a candidate, was described in the early part of his presidential campaign as a wimp. That rankled him. That has not been a motivation for his attacks, but he has certainly demonstrated as a commander-in-chief that he is not afraid to pull the trigger in effect. NBC's Rick Davis is our man in Saudi Arabia at this moment. Rick Davis has spent a good deal of his reporting career throughout the Middle East, based in Jordan for a while until he was thrown out. And now he is back in Saudi Arabia once again. Rick, we have been talking this evening about the Arab mindset. It is, as we all know, very dangerous. It is a complex part of the world. In the last 24 hours, they had the assassination of 2 high-level PLO officials as well. What do you think will happen once this air raid is over, if it goes even as well as the United States would like it to?
Well, I think if it goes well and a great many lives are lost inside of Iraq, there will be a great anger in much of the Arab world. certainly in Amman, Jordan, is all over Jordan, where 60% of the population is Palestinian, and in the West Bank and all the occupied territories. You will also see expressions of anger coming from other Arab countries. The leaders may be on the side of the united front against Iraq, but certainly many people within Arab countries are not. They see this as another crusade. They see this as a Western war in many ways, that this is the West against the Muslim world. So I think there will be a residual of animosity for a long time to come. Certainly there's a new alliance being formed here with the Saudis, that perhaps we can use them and their strong religious connections to help assuage that. But there's no question in my mind that there will be bitterness after this, and there will be some problems ahead for all of us.
Rick Davis, this business of the PLO, when I was in Baghdad over the weekend, Yasser Arafat was there. He was going around trying to encourage some kind of a peace process. It's his interest, after all. If this does not go well for the Iraqis, who have been trying to portray themselves as champions of the Palestinians in the final weeks of this campaign, what happens to Yasser Arafat now that his two top aides have been killed?
I think Yasser Arafat must be a very lonely man in many ways now. 2 of the 4 men who helped him found Fatah, his wing of the PLO, are dead. Another, Khalid al-Hassan, who helped found the PLO, has taken a negative view of his support for Iraq and has sort of pulled out of the PLO temporarily. I think Arafat and the Palestinian cause has been greatly harmed by this, and I'm certain it will go well. It certainly, Iraq will be crushed by all of it. But what's going to happen now within the PLO will be extremely difficult, because they've lost a great deal of their financial support and all over the Arab world. They've lost their Saudi support, who had contributed millions and millions of dollars to the PLO cause. No question, Arafat will be an extremely harmed man. He said just a week ago to me in Tunis that he thought there was less than a 30% chance of war, that this would all work out, that there would be some settlement. Yasser Arafat was wrong about that, and Yasser Arafat was wrong when he decided to side with Iraq.
All right, thanks very much, Rick Davis in Saudi Arabia tonight. We have some additional information on how all of this unfolded today. We can report from reliable sources that in terms of the American attack, yes, the British were involved as well as the Saudis. The Saudis used 150 fighter planes in the attack. They have a pretty good air force in Saudi Arabia, more than a pretty good air force. In fact, Prince Bandar, who is the Saudi ambassador to the United States, is a fully qualified F-15 and I think even F-16 pilot. Today at 7:30, he was called to the State Department and told that this was likely to happen if they could get the go-ahead from King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, who is, of course, the king, the ruling member of the family there. That came back from King Fahd. It is all right to launch what they're now calling Desert Storm, and the attack was launched tonight. The Saudis have felt very strongly from the outset that there was only one way to deal with Saddam Hussein of Iraq. He is their neighbor to the north. They were extremely worried, and with good cause, that he was going to invade not just Kuwait, but Saudi Arabia as well. That started Desert Shield first. Now Desert Storm has taken effect in an effort to knock him out. The Saudis have profited from this from a oil point of view. They have pumped a lot more oil, and they've made a lot of money, but they're also writing big checks to help underwrite the cost of this whole operation. Prince Bandar has been a man in the middle of it all, working very carefully and closely with Secretary of State Baker and going back. Let's go now to Washington, D.C., to Colonel Harry Summer, who's standing by, and Ed Peck. There are 2 of our political and military experts who are with us tonight. Gentlemen, the President of the United States did not pull the trigger, in effect, until he got the go-ahead, if you will, from King Fahd of Saudi Arabia. That, I would think, is appropriate. Don't you think, Colonel Summers?
Oh, exactly. This war, as we said earlier, is a political act, and one of the main things we need to understand is that this is a coalition action. We sometimes, as Americans, think it's all our show, but it's not. And I think it's very significant, especially to the Arab world, that the Arabians were on board before, Saudis were on board before this began.
And Ed Peck, what about the role of Saudi Arabia now in that part of the world? They have been hand in glove with the United States in this massive military operation. In effect, their culture has been invaded by not just a big military machine, but by many of our values as well. And that has been effectively a closed society for a long time. How do you think Saudi Arabia might change as a result of all of this?
Well, I suppose that the first thing will happen is that when the shooting stops and the forces are drawn sharply down, as I assume they would be, Saudi Arabia will tend to go back to the way it was before. And the disruption becomes perhaps intense, but of relatively short duration. And I wouldn't imagine that it would make, to my own way of thinking, make an enormous difference in the overall scheme of things that large numbers of Americans were there for a relatively short time. Saudi Arabia is evolving like every other country in the world, and it'll continue to do so. But I never had the impression that the sort of events that have led up to this war would make a lasting, deep impression in that very short space of time in which there was this interaction.
You heard the United Nations ambassador from Kuwait, Mohammed Abul Hassan, talking about his country and what we can expect once they return to power, as he hopes, obviously, that they will. What can we expect from Kuwait in terms of a change in its political attitudes, Mr. Peck?
Sir, I have the impression that, they're going back to reestablish Kuwait as the way it was is going to be a lot harder than you might imagine. If it's true that the country was almost totally pillaged by the Iraqis, in addition to the killings and all the rest of it, it's going to take it'd be a difficult job to reestablish Kuwait the way it was before. The ruling family has been shaken up quite a bit by the events that transpired. The country has been economically set back quite a ways. Politically, it's going to be altered dramatically. And I would suppose that once the Kuwaiti royal family gets back in position and begins to reestablish itself, that country will emerge markedly different from what it was before the Iraqi invasion of August 2nd.
Colonel Summers, let me ask you to go put on your old hat. You're retired now from the active military, but you did see more than your share of combat in Korea and in Vietnam as well. You're up near the front tonight, back in your old job. You've got a battalion under your command, and you're hearing these reports of an air attack. What's going through your mind at this hour?
Certainly a great deal of anticipation, a great deal of anxiety to some degree that you're ready. Anxiety more to the fact, are you prepared for this? Are you ready? Have you done all the things that you should have done to make sure your men are well-equipped, well-trained, and ready for this? So I think that's really the state of mind that's going on right now.
You've got a whole lot of people, however, in your unit who have never seen combat before. They joined the Army because they thought maybe they could get help with a college education or for a variety of other reasons. They did not expect a shooting war to begin. Based on your ability to assess this Army from this distance and the kind of training that they've received, how confident would you be of the ground forces?
I must say, having joined the Army myself for a pre-college education and got caught up in the Korean War, I understand their feelings. But I think this is the best trained Army we have ever had on the beginning of a war, that the quality of the force is unbelievably good and their training has been exceptional.
And the high-tech warfare that we can launch on the ground, do you have confidence in that as well? Those attack helicopters and the armor units in a very hostile environment, after all.
Well, I must say, as an infantryman, high-tech is a good infantry rifle. But yes, I think the equipment is good, but I think the soldier, the Army is peculiar in that, in the Army at least, the weapons support the soldier rather than the other way around. And I think the weapons are good, but our soldiers are very good, and I think that they'll equip themselves very well.
We're going to show another map, if we can, of that area. As you and I talk about this, Colonel Summers, we can point out where those forces are positioned in northern Saudi Arabia and along the Kuwaiti border. But you would not expect, I gather, that there would be a frontal attack right there where we see Kuwait spelled out, correct?
Almost certainly no frontal attack, except attack by fire, but it's certainly not by troops.
And if it comes to ground forces, describe for us, as we look at that map, how they would come in, left to right.
Well, I think what we'll do is, as I say, attack by fire along the line. And the objective there is to keep the Iraqi forces pinned down so that they can't move and that they can't maneuver against us. I think we will at least feint and maybe carry through with an invasion on the coast by the Marines. Even the threat of that ties down some 5 Iraqi divisions. And then at the proper time, when the enemy forces have been softened up as much as possible by fire, then I think probably to the west we'll see an armor thrust to pierce through their lines and get behind them and cut Kuwait off literally from Iraq itself.
What are our fears tonight about the Iraqi army? They've got a whole lot of tanks, and some of them pretty sophisticated Soviet tanks, correct?
Exactly so. They have good, the T-72 is a good tank. It's not as good as the M1 Abrams, but it's a good tank, and they've got a lot of them.
But do we think that they can roll those tanks after this kind of an air attack?
All right? And that's the critical point to understand. Air control is essential. Once we gain air control, and we certainly will gain air control, then their armored forces will be almost impossible for them to move. So that the air campaign and the ground campaign fits together.
That business about an air campaign, describe for us the kind of attack, what come from helicopters. The F-15 is not particularly effective, as I gather, against tanks on the ground. So it would be the new, the new Apache helicopters and the old Cobras?
It'll be the Warthogs, of course, that are specifically designed as tank busters. The Apache helicopters with their Hellfire missile systems. But also, as we saw and we talked about a little bit yesterday, the B-52s used in a ground support role can be just devastating. That is, as we said yesterday, that whole divisions at Khartoum, for example, and Quezon just disappeared. And we can expect that kind of very massive bombing of the front lines at some stage in this air campaign.
All right, thanks very much. Colonel Harry Summers, who's been on the front lines himself, military strategist and instructor at the War College, and a guy who's been following all of this very carefully, describing the kind of training that these men received. When you talk to those people at the field command level in Saudi Arabia, colonels, majors, captains even, they said that they were in fact grateful that they had 5 months in the desert sands to get their troops ready. The troops quickly got eager to go home or to go forward, but the commanders were very happy to have that 5 months to adjust not only to the climate, but to work out their forces and their strategy in the desert sands. And they got used to the idea of sandstorms, colder desert nights at the end, living among camels, and now moving up north and waiting to see just how effective this airstrike will be. President Bush is expected in the White House at the Oval Office to talk to all of us, to address this nation tonight on Operation Desert Storm in about 4 minutes. NBC's John Cochran is one of our White House correspondents. He's been there all evening long. John, any additional word on what we can expect from the president?
Well, I do think we're going to hear him make some sort of overture to Saddam Hussein. Whether he's going to talk about when he's going to stop the attack, we just don't know. I'm told the president was still working on this after 8 p.m. That was, in other words, in the last hour. So there could be last-minute changes, possibly based on what reports he's getting back from his military people, Tom. We are told, incidentally, that he made the decision to order this attack at least 2 days ago. Now, of course, it was a tentative decision. If Saddam Hussein had in a substantial way started removing his people from Kuwait, the president could have stopped this machinery. But he made the basic decision about at least 2 days ago. And the reason I say at least 2 days ago, that's when some of his aides first learned about it. They don't know exactly when in his own head he decided, Tom.
John Cochran, we're going to go now back down to Washington, D.C., to the Capitol, I think. NBC's Andrea Mitchell with Senator David Boren, who's chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was brought into this process early on, and we're going to hear about what the targets were and how they were selected. Andrea?
He was briefed indeed as chairman of the Intelligence Committee by the CIA director, William Webster. What targeting were you told about?
Andrea, I think obviously we want to knock out the command and control mechanism. The important thing is to decapitate the Iraqi military, to knock out the top leaders and their ability to communicate with their troops so they will feel deserted. The other important thing is to knock out the missile launch capability that could threaten other countries, our troops in Saudi Arabia, Israel, and other countries. That's extremely important, and also knocking out the chemical, nuclear, and biological warfare capability. I think we want to hear from the president. It's going to be interesting to see how successful we've been in severing this command and control network, because that will affect our ability of succeeding as this thing goes along. So that's extremely important. In my opinion, certainly they've picked the right targets. They're going at it the right way, and we just all hope and pray that this first strike will be a very successful one.
Well, stand by, Senator Boren. I know after the president speaks, we'll want to talk to you again about your assessment of his analysis. Tom?
Yeah, Andrea, very briefly, does the senator know whether the president will offer a pause for Saddam Hussein to now get out of Kuwait?
The question from Tom Brokaw is whether the president will now offer a pause for Saddam Hussein to get out of Kuwait.
I don't think we know that at all until we hear it from the president. I don't know. Either this is a massive strike that will be continuing on, or it is in the nature of something of a demonstration to Saddam to what he can expect. And I think we'll wait to have to hear from the president as to which course he's following at this point.
Okay, Tom, and the official notification in writing did go to the leaders under that declaration, the resolution from the joint session of Congress, and that official notification in writing came from the White House tonight here to Capitol Hill.
NBC's Andrea Mitchell, thanks very much. The Senate Intelligence Committee chairman is Senator David Bourne, Democrat of Oklahoma, and he was briefed, as you heard, by the CIA on what is going on. Intelligence is crucial in all of this, and of course the Congress now has established this apparatus so that it too can be a piece, have a part in the decision-making process and be briefed along the way. But ultimately, the decision rests with the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States. He did make the decision. We've been hearing that he made it 2 days ago. Today, he decided to launch Desert Storm. It has now been underway for about 4 hours, and we're going to go to the Oval Office momentarily to hear from the President of the United States as he speaks to the country and what has been going on tonight in the name of everyone here. And here now is the President of the United States, George Bush, addressing the nation from the Oval Office, Operation Desert Storm.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League and a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined. This military action, taken in accord with United Nations resolutions and with the consent of the United States Congress, follows months of constant and virtually endless diplomatic activity on the part of the United Nations, the United States, and many, many other countries. Arab leaders sought what became known as an Arab solution, only to conclude that Saddam Hussein was unwilling to leave Kuwait. Others traveled to Baghdad in a variety of efforts to restore peace and justice. Our Secretary of State, James Baker, held an historic meeting in Geneva, only to be totally rebuffed. This past weekend, in a last-ditch effort, the Secretary General of the United Nations went to the Middle East with peace in his heart, his second such mission, and he came back from Baghdad with no progress at all in getting Saddam Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait. Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are under